How's it going, everybody? Welcome back to the STD Podcast. This week we have a guest on, Alex Anderson, who is a physical therapist. Alex, how you doing?
Doing great, man. Glad to be here. How you guys doing?
Yeah,
Wonderful.
great.
Doing good.
Well, just wanted to thank you for coming on. If you could briefly just introduce yourself to our audience, who you are, what you do.
Yeah, thanks for having me, guys. I always listen to your guys' stuff every week. Like you said, I'm a doctor of physical therapy. I've practiced in multiple different settings to now. I've worked with athletes ranging from your weekend warrior to your Division I athlete to your weightlifter, powerlifter, hypertrophy trainee. I've been working in outpatient for 3 years now, and just this week I transitioned and took a home health job that I'm hoping is going to give me a little bit of time on the side to build my own independent practice. So I train for hypertrophy, strength, just like pretty much everyone listening to this podcast, I'm sure. Been doing that since I was in high school, really, when I just wanted to become more athletic, and picked up a book called the Vertical Jump Development Bible because I could barely touch the net. I started back squatting, and a few months later, I was grabbing the rim, and the rest was kind of history. So I fell in love with weightlifting after my basketball career was over, and just trying to pay it back now in the therapy field.
That's awesome. So as far as home health, what does that kind of entail? Is that you said outpatient, so like going to people's houses, or?
Yep. So this current job I have, people after having joint replacement surgeries or anybody that's been hospitalized, deconditioned, maybe a fall risk, get a call with their address, go out to their house and do therapy in the house. So very minimal equipment. You have to get pretty creative. A lot of times it's slowly reducing the height of a chair somebody's doing a squat from to stand up, or practicing steps, doing some balance exercises, even simple as reaching up over your head into a cabinet. But
Yeah.
it's amazing. It's amazing, which I'm sure we'll talk about a little bit tonight. Um, how you can scale common movements that we're used to and take for granted to people to get them just to a base level of function.
Yeah, most definitely. I think just
Mm-hmm.
the basic exercises like something such as a squatting pattern, and how you use that in your daily life, or some sort of overhead movement to kind of be able to reach something. Yep. And be able to balance it and actually be able to handle the load. My question is, do you have like what carryover, if any, do you see from some of your training, like your hypertrophy training? Do you have any sort of carryover you see between these people who are more sedentary generally, coming off these injuries, and how you kind of apply your practice to them?
Yeah, for sure. And that's probably going to be a big topic once we get into it tonight. But the same movement patterns that we all do, just with extra load for the purpose of hypertrophy, applies to all of these individuals, from deconditioned senior adults in home health to your average weekend warrior with, say, knee or shoulder pain. It's taking the movement patterns and altering the variables of which they're performed to meet somebody where they are with the idea of reaching a certain goal. So your general person who, let's just say, has a knee replacement and is having trouble getting off the toilet, that's doing a lower squat pattern, right? So we have to change the variable of increasing or decreasing the range of motion to make it better. And I'll often scale it to, let's use less or more hand assistance if need be, even to the point of standing in front of someone and putting my hands out and letting them use me as assistance. And then it's progressive overload from there. Slowly decreasing the height of the surface, increasing the range of motion, maybe staggering your feet a little bit to preference one leg or the other. There's a lot you can do with it that you wouldn't think about just your average Joe walking down the street, but we all do every day and sort of do it just automatic. It's interesting to take that knowledge in my training life and then bring these variables up to people who can't perform at a higher level or are deconditioned, and just see a light bulb go on. It's pretty rewarding. And then it's even better when, say, you go back to the next visit or a week from now and they can just recall the information and do it themselves.
Yeah. And you're talking about, in our realm, a lot of the time you're talking about like better, physique outcome, but you're talking about quality of life for a lot of these people too. So
yeah,
the impact can be pretty great too. So that
mm-hmm.
is really cool in that regard. Well, Trevor was the person who had the idea for doing this podcast. I think injury and rehab are some questions that we all commonly get. And a lot of the time, we have the common answer of, avoid pain, go see a physical therapist, right? If it is an actual, injury that is chronic, or something that was acute that happened that, is causing you pain in your daily life. So I think this is going to be really relevant, but Trevor, if you could kick us off with some of the questions that you had for Alex.
Yeah. So I just get kind of digging into some of the things you already said. You're talking about like, a lot of the things you're doing with patients is the same movement patterns that we all know. It's the same squatting patterns. It's the same hinging patterns, the same pressing patterns, all these things. And I just kind of wanted to get into like this idea that like a lot of people, they get hurt and their first idea is stop doing everything. I hurt my knee, so I'm going to stop training legs. And what you just described is graded exposure.
Yep. That's the term.
Yeah. And that's the thing that like, if you want to talk a little bit about that, like just a little bit more in depth about like using graded exposure to, deal with rehabbing from an injury, coming back into regular training.
Yeah, for sure. And to set the stage a little bit for that, it's all contextual, context dependent. And I think coming from the perspective of the healthcare profession, historically, if somebody went to their doctor, the primary care physician, and said, I'm having pain with X or Y, the initial thought process was, let's take some imaging, let's identify whatever anatomical structure is causing you this pain and why it's broken. And in my world, that's called your biomedical model. It's very much X part of your body is injured or abnormal, therefore you're having pain from it. And with years of neurological research, we know that's not the case. It's entirely possible to be experiencing pain but not be injured. And that's a little byline I give people all the time is pain does not equal injury. Pain can sometimes just mean you hurt. It's a sensory response to a stimulus, essentially. So with that graded exposure, to your point, somebody went to their doctor, and this still happens a lot. You go to your doctor and say, hey, I'm having knee or shoulder pain, and they'll tell you now, just for insurance reimbursement purposes, stop whatever causes you the pain, take 4 to 6 weeks off, here's a referral, go see a physical occupational therapist. And that will typically be the experience you get. So to graded exposure, there's commonly 2 different approaches to that. Let's say you go see a physical therapist and you detail, this is my problem that I'm having. The graded exposure side of it is what I mentioned earlier, is meeting somebody where they're at. So I'm always looking for an entry point to start building this person back toward their goal. So let's say you come to me and say, I have knee pain, for an easy example. I'm going to ask you questions like, when does your knee pain occur? If this is just an example of your average walking off the street person, when does your knee pain occur? What makes it worse? What makes it better? What's your lifestyle like? All of those questions will give me an idea of where someone is in their journey trying to get through this pain. And the most important question is probably, what's your goal? And that leads directly to the graded exposure part. Because if you can find the point to where someone can perform something similar or that activity that's their goal, you can adjust all the variables to start to where their symptoms are controlled, and then grade that exposure to be more and more and more. So the common thought in the past of take 4 to 6 weeks, rest, don't do the thing that hurts, is a little flawed in that you essentially detrain during that period from whatever stimulus is causing you the pain, right? So if you're having pain going up the steps and somebody tells you don't go up the steps, then you might feel better in the short term. But once you go back to that activity or something that stresses your body similarly, that pain's probably going to come back if the underlying issue isn't fully addressed. So essentially, that's just the Band-Aid over the bullet hole instead of addressing the main cause of the issue.
No, go ahead. That's just it's just kind of really cool to hear you describe that in the physical therapy sense, because that's a lot of times in more of the like coaching sense, strength conditioning stuff, we'll find that people have a exposure threshold to intensity here.
Mm-hmm.
That's a really common one. And they're like, oh, well, when I'm squatting heavy, it hurts my knees. Okay, well, squat lighter.
Mm-hmm.
And you can do things to make that hard, but it's the same model of just graded exposure. We're finding your threshold of pain, and sorry, my dogs are being assholes tonight.
I don't even
We're
hear them.
slowly bringing, testing that threshold and pushing it a little bit over time to improve the outcome of pain and performance.
Mm-hmm.
So it's just really cool listening to you talk about it in that more healthcare.
And if you just go strictly by similarity and definitions, graded exposure is progressive overload. It's just applied in the context of rehab from an injury or the progression of addressing a pain issue. So, like you said, the exact same increases that you would see in hypertrophy, strength, or athletic training: increase in resistance, increase in intensity, decrease in rest times, an increase in volume, improving your technique in context of your goal. All of those things are the blueprint to a solid rehab plan for improving pain or rehabbing from an injury. And all of that, context is just so important in hypertrophy training, athletics, healthcare field. There's really no one set, this works for everybody, go do it. I wish it were that simple. My life would be a whole lot easier. But yeah, and you have to get the baseline information from the individual you're working with to find out what their triggers are, what their provocative factors are, what their alleviating factors are, and get an idea of where they want to be at the end of that process of working with you. So in that sense, it's definitely no different than any of the coaching you guys do.
Yeah, definitely. I had a question. A lot of the time and maybe you can talk about this a little bit, but when in the occurrence of an injury, you had mentioned avoidance of the thing that causes the pain, right? Mm-hmm. Finding the movements that cause relief, and from what my understanding is, loading those however you can. Why would finding movements that are pain-free and then using those, how does that contribute? And I imagine it's multifactorial. How does that contribute to the recovery process?
There is a lot of factors to play into it. Going back to what I said briefly a little bit ago, the biomedical model used to be you have a certain tissue or structure that's damaging your body, causing the pain. And we know now that's unequivocally not true. Recently, there was a study looking at people with low back pain and images of their spine. The majority of people who were reporting low back pain symptoms had no abnormal findings on an MRI. But there was a certain percentage of that same analysis where people who had degenerative disc disease, herniated discs, spinal nerve compression were asymptomatic. So moving away from that understanding that a specific damage or insult to your body doesn't always equal pain is really the first thing that I would try to explain to someone in that scenario. Build that confidence to sort of alleviate the psychosocial factors of fear avoidance of pain. That's a big one that causes pain symptoms to linger. Being more confident in the movements that they're trying to do. And then that's where the point you brought up comes in, finding movements that they can do that apply to the principle of specificity, that are that thing, maybe adjusting the technique and how they're performing it, or taking a movement that loads the similar tissues or is a close relation to the movement someone's having pain or difficulty with, and then progressing there. Because essentially what you're doing is, back to that graded exposure, you're giving a sensory stimulus to your nervous system to interpret that input as not painful. And if it's using the similar structures that's giving that stimulus, you're going to eventually have that breakthrough moment. But the caveat with that is, and where a lot of people kind of self-inflict the injury to themselves, is not sticking to that plan and executing it and going right back to the things that are causing them pain and provoking it over and over and over. And going back to a little bit of more modern neurological research, your nervous system can become hypersensitized to certain stimuluses and essentially learn to have a response to that stimulus. So let's say you're having shoulder pain, elbow pain with bench pressing, and you say, yeah, it's okay. I'm just going to reduce the weight a little bit, but it's still there. And you try to load it back up and the pain gets worse. You're essentially teaching your body to respond to that movement pattern with a pain signal. So to get out of that, you have to give it a pain-free signal in similarity to that movement or loading pattern to help improve the symptoms. And with that, it's a little nuanced in how you approach it, right? So just like everything, it depends. But a good rule of thumb, if you're having pain with a certain movement or loading pattern, is if your symptoms are controlled, and in my world, that phrase is used to your tolerance. But I think that's a little vague because everybody's pain tolerance is different. You know, all of us in this call, all of our pain tolerances are different. But if you put an objective measure to that, am I doing something that my pain levels are consistent? Yes or no? If yes, and they don't increase as you're increasing the intensity of the movement, the volume, or any of those other variables, it's probably okay to try to work through it to a point. Now, if you're doing that movement and increasing the intensity and the symptoms aren't controlled, meaning they just get worse and worse, the more loads you add, the more repetitions you do, the more sets you add, it's a good idea to back off from it. If that makes sense.
Absolutely. It's very interesting to think of pain as not only a physiological response, but I mean, it is, as you're explaining it, physiological, but there's a psychological component too, it seems like, to some degree.
Yeah, and there's so many factors that play into it that we know now. The guys that I don't know if you guys are familiar with barbell medicine, but they do a great job talking about pain research and exercise science. And they have multiple articles talking about your nutrition, your sleep quality, your beliefs on the pain someone's experiencing, your past prior experiences with pain. All of these psychosocial factors play into it, even the narratives that you're told. So if one of you guys went to a doctor, came to me, and you were unsure about your pain and didn't know how to navigate it, and I told you, oh, you're having elbow pain, it means that your tricep tendon is frayed, and you leave there not having any knowledge otherwise, that narrative is going to play into your head.
Yeah, I think that's something that we see in personal training. Is like someone feels like broken, like someone does an assessment of them. You have this, and I'm sure it exists in your field too, where someone comes in, they're trying to sell someone on all the things that they're broken. This is dysfunctional, and this is broken, and this person leaves feeling like demoralized, and they use that as a selling point, as to hey, well, we're gonna fix it, we're gonna fix you. So that's
the time.
Yeah, that's really an important thing. I'm curious kind of how you navigate it. I mean, you kind of alluded to that, but
yeah, it's not an uncommon occurrence to see somebody in clinic or to have somebody, I'm all the time, I'm kind of a Reddit junkie. I get on the fitness Reddit a lot, and there are a lot of people that post on there that say, hey, I'm having X and Y pain. I went to my doctor or my physio and they told me this. Can anybody help me? It's usually met with a response, go see another PT. So it's interesting, but yeah, navigating that is really hard, because once people are dug into a philosophy or an opinion, trying to present alternate information to that can be a difficult challenge. Yeah. If you meet it head on in a combative way, or just straight up say, no, that's not true, let me tell you what is. If someone has had a good experience with that philosophy that they're talking about, or maybe even temporary pain relief, you're going to be met with some resistance, and you're probably not going to get the buy-in with that person that you need to have a successful plan. So it's oftentimes not just one conversation that those opinions change. It's kind of a little bit of chipping away at it over time. So commonly, the first time I meet people in clinic, I ask those questions. What are your lifestyles? What do you know about what you're experiencing? How do you think you could approach it? And get their information. That way I know in the future how to navigate those little potential snags. So and then even showing someone success, right? Like, off the top of my head, a common example I could think of was someone who was having shoulder pain with lateral raises and overhead presses that I saw recently. And they reflected to me on the first visit, well, I just don't know what's going on because I've been doing what I saw of keeping my shoulder blades down and back with all these movements, and it's not helping. So then I know, like, okay, well, we're going to have to talk a little bit about shoulder mechanics and what your scapula actually does and how that relates to these pressing movements that you're having trouble with, but not right now. So even with that person, it started off with just encouraging them to put their hands on the wall, take their hands off the wall as far as they can until they feel a little bit of pain, come back down. It looks like an overhead press. It's not loaded. Their symptoms were controlled. I didn't touch the narrative of let your shoulder blades rotate upward. Don't try to do that. Just do what feels natural the first time, and then we'll build from there. So that slowly morphed into the next time. Okay, that didn't make my pain get any worse. Okay, cool. Well, here, let's put the pretty pink dumbbell in your hand in clinic that weighs 1 pound and do a lateral raise for me. And they do it, of course, with that same technique of trying to pack their shoulder blades here, and they get to here and start like shrugging upwards and, oh, that hurts. Okay, yeah, of course. So now then you say, reel it back a little bit, go within the range of motion that you can until you start to feel pain, and don't go any further. They get that little bit of success, get to that area, and you start to say, okay, we're doing the movement. It's not as painful anymore. Builds a little confidence. Don't touch the narrative yet, right? You got to get someone to see the plan. Then when that happens, I usually try to broach the subject a little bit. Hey, thinking back to the first time I saw you, you mentioned this. Let's talk about it a little bit. And then I'll get into the anatomy. Here's what your shoulder does. Here's the mechanics of it. So you're fighting against your own mechanics performing the movement that way. Try it this way. Don't think about pinning your shoulder blades down and back. Just think about controlling the weight, controlling the movement. Stop when it starts to hurt. And sure enough, you see them start working through that a little bit. And eventually, typically the light bulb goes on. And it's like, oh, okay, maybe performing it this way was causing me issues. And if I change that, it gets better. And I'm never one in clinic, at least, to, especially working with weightlifters or athletes, to really be the technique police, right? Like, I know a lot of people in my field are so concerned about the quality of someone's movement, their pelvic positioning, their shoulder blade positioning. And at the end of the day, that's kind of majoring in the minors a little bit. So bringing that back to your point, how to get someone to make that progression, to be willing to open to talk about the narratives that they've been told before, is showing them success, and then starting to talk a little bit more about changing the way they were performing something if they were having a problem with it.
Yeah, that's
it's
a
really little bit of a long-winded answer, but it's
go ahead, Trevor.
Having buy-in and momentum with them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And it's really important to at least start talking about having setbacks, because that's inevitable. I can't tell you one time I've seen someone over a full plan of care that they haven't had bad days. Mm-hmm. And it's important to talk about that and say, yeah, you're going to have days to where you experience more pain. It's not that linear progression of I'm here and I hurt and I'm just going to keep getting better over the next 2 or 3 weeks where I'm pain free. But that's always good opportunities to talk about what were some factors around that pain flare up. Did you train that day? Did you do maybe a few more repetitions? Did you add a set? Did you try a different movement? Because all of those factors play into that pain experience.
Yeah, it's important because life's going to happen regardless. So being there and being able to approach that with them. And
yeah, I mean, heck,
navigate it.
Someone can have a pain flare up from nothing they did in the gym or nothing they did on the court of the field. It could have been walking up the stairs or bending over to play with your dog or whatever.
When you hurt yourself getting out of your car.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I found people like blame themselves sometimes. They're like, I slept wrong, and it's like, well, like you were sleeping, so like there's only so much you can do about
Don't get me started on the sleeping position conversation.
Yeah. Sure, you have a lot to say about that one.
What's the optimal sleeping position? I need to know.
Well, I think it's with 5 pillows behind your head and your arms at exactly 45 degrees abduction and a wedge between your head.
Okay, wait, what's abduction? I'm writing this down.
You require that because you're too big otherwise.
I can't sleep on my back anymore. I literally can't breathe. So that one's out.
God. Well, I hate to tell you then, Dylan, you're just not optimal.
There's a lot of things about my lifestyle that are not optimal. That's a whole podcast in itself.
Next podcast Digging intervention for Dylan's life.
Yeah. What's wrong with Dylan? If there's an apocalypse, I'm probably one of the first ones to die because of all the things I rely on to live my daily life.
Great.
Alex, I've got a question for you. What are some top things that you can recommend listeners and whoever checks this podcast out, or what you do with your patients? Top things that you recommend people to do to prevent ever seeing you?
Good question. The best things, top things in context of an athlete weightlifter.
That's kind of the audience, so
sure.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
first and foremost,
well, not a weightlifter. Let's be pedantic here. No, physique trainee,
athlete.
a power lifter type, that kind of thing. Not Olympic weightlifting, because we don't have that.
Someone who lifts weights.
Yeah. So the first recommendation would be to make sure you are in tune with your technique and how performing movements feels for you. And that goes back to the old stimulus to fatigue ratio, right? If you're performing a certain movement with a certain load or a certain technique, and you're having the joint pain, the connective tissue pain during the movement or afterward, it's probably worth looking into before the issue gets out of hand. And by that, I mean experimenting with changing your technique somehow, maybe reducing the load, changing your tempo, altering the volume. That's what's the saying? An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. So all the principles you guys talk about very frequently, that's the first recommendation, because there's nothing in known science that's going to beat that from a perspective of not injuring yourself or giving yourself the best chance to not experience pain. At the end of the day, everybody's going to experience pain when they're active. That's just a little bit of the fact of life. But if you're training through the fullest range of motion someone can without having joint connective tissue pain, controlling all of your movements and finding the technique that gives you the best work, that's the first step there. The second step would be having a solid plan for your progressions. That's one that typically is a red flag for a lot of athletes, weightlifters, hypertrophy trainees, physique athletes, power lifters that I see. It's the very aggressive and quick ramp ups of intensity, loading, resistance, volumes. And it always comes back to them reflecting in some form or another, well, I want to get better quicker. And that's when I always take the opportunity to talk about the benefits of increasing your intensities or your volumes or your training loads as you're tolerating, not on an arbitrary standard. And again, that goes back to your stimulus fatigue ratio and your progression indicators. But you'd be surprised, a lot of people who train or in athletics aren't really aware of that. You know, they just kind of say, well, somebody told me to do it, or this is just what I do, or I just try to add 5 or 10 pounds to the bar every time. Yep. And yeah, and at some point you run out of adaptations to make. And that's a little opportunity for me, at least in clinic, to give the science the answer of what is actually occurring when your body is making adaptations and the rate at which that occurs versus how fast you can progress. And that's sometimes even having a difficult conversation with people. You need to go from training at this intensity or this volume, back it down, essentially take a deload, and maybe find the middle ground between those two areas and try to progress from there. And to give people an idea, this is often a process that occurs over weeks and months. It's not something that just takes care of itself in half a week or 1 or 2 training sessions. You know, you really have to understand the timeline you're playing with and be flexible with that timeline, and understand that sometimes any symptoms you're having can get better quicker. Sometimes they can take longer to resolve. But getting a good stimulus fatigue ratio down, first step. Being diligent with your progressions to any intensity, volume, any increases you're doing in your training program. And that doesn't mean be conservative with it, but at least be aware and making the appropriate choices for you. The third recommendation would be, and this kind of goes back to a little bit of a bro science thing, but control the weight, don't let it control you, right? A lot of injuries that occur in gyms and lifting that I've seen over my career have been from people who are progressing too quickly and letting the control of the resistance get a little loosey goosey. Ranging from pec tears, rotator cuff tears, even a few interesting cases of MCL, ACL tears.
My
So
God.
yeah. It's amazing how sometimes things and people in the gym just let things get out of control. But the progression methods, and that's one of the reasons, all of the content you guys put out really mirrors all of those concepts that I'm talking about from a healthcare therapy perspective. It's just toned down a little bit. And that's going back to meeting someone where they are. If they're not tolerating making progressions, let's say on a training program, it might be worth talking to a therapist who is knowledgeable in the area and working with you guys. Let's say you all have a client who's experiencing these issues and it's not getting any better. I can't imagine any of you guys would be against collaborating with a PT who's working with a client that's knowledgeable with it. And I've done that multiple times and it works out great. It's cool because at least in an outpatient setting, I see people 2-3 times a week at most, sometimes once. But if you're a trainer, even now in the digital age where you guys get training footage, where you talk to people more often, how'd that feel? Getting that collaboration. If anybody has a coach out there that is listening that's going through any sort of injury or pain issue that they just can't figure out, it might be worth talking to get a little collaboration going between a knowledgeable PT and your coach.
So I just want to take a minute and those 3 points you listed.
Mm-hmm.
So to bring that to terms that we use a lot, what I'm hearing is technique, pick good SFR exercises, and fatigue management.
That's it. That's your blueprint. That's your blueprint.
Trevor, technique, volume, intensity, and fatigue management. Basically, all the things that we say.
Yeah, yep. Well, and volume intensity can be put into fatigue management because that's all encompassing of managing fatigue by varying intensity, volume.
The beauty of what you guys, the concepts you all talk about, Dr. Mike, some other people out there that are really up to the science, is that what you're talking about can be directly applied to anyone going through an injury almost one-to-one. You just have to alter the variables a little bit.
Yeah.
And that, I think that's great because in the exercise field, there's a lot of people now who are up to date on the best evidence practice, not only from a healthcare perspective and a general wellness perspective, but applying it to science and athletics too. It's awesome to see. There was a real big gap there for many, many years.
Yeah.
And there still is, to be clear. There still is.
There definitely still is, just as a general fitness sphere as a whole.
Mm-hmm.
I want to take a moment though and just talk about a little bit of that. And this is kind of for me because of the three of us, I can have a different perspective of this, of getting outside of physique training enthusiasts and into other athletic endeavors.
Mm-hmm.
I do Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu.
Yeah.
I have done it for nearly a decade and have had no big injuries.
Hold on. That's crazy.
Shimmy, you're cutting out. I can't hear a word you're saying.
Nearly a decade you've been doing that.
I know. I'm fucking
You can't
old.
hear me?
Yeah.
I think he just called you a boomer, Trevor.
I am.
Crazy.
Me too, I'm sure.
One of in that, of course, I've had mild injuries.
Mm-hmm.
Again, it goes back, like you said, if you're being physically active, things are going to happen. You're going to get bumps and bruises along the road. But I've had no major injuries, and I talk to guys who are generally they're younger, early 20s, and they've had a lot of injuries, or they're constantly hurt, and not just with like, oh, I'm feeling kind of stiff today, but like actually like pretty major injuries that lead to, because they continue to ignore them, multiple guys I know have had surgery. And one of the big things I see, and I try to talk to these guys about, is like, they're like, how do you're not hurt, you're here all the time. How do you do that? And I'm like, well, I don't have to roll every single day like I'm in ADCC finals. I don't have to give 100% every single time.
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of talking about like how a lot of these the principles can fit into different like different avenues. So there's how fatigue management and all this stuff fits into healthcare, and how it fits into physique training, but also how it fits into other athletics. Like these same things apply regardless of what you're doing. We generally, us three are talking about using good SFR exercises, managing your fatigue, all these things in the context of physique training.
Mm-hmm.
But that doesn't mean it stops there.
Nope.
I think hearing you talk about it is really cool, because it's kind of showing like what most people would consider completely unrelated. It's just like physical therapy, and even with just a general population person that's not trained, these same things can be taken and applied there.
For sure. And going back to the part about the general population, I can't tell you how many times I've seen somebody with some sort of ailment, from lower back pain to knee pain to ankle pain or whatever. And when I suggest, hey, let's work on squatting, they look at me like I have 3 heads and I'm breathing fire. I can't squat. No way. There's no way I can do that. And then you get them to just stand up out of the chair. And I say, guess what? You just did a squat. Yep. And then they think, oh, well, that wasn't that bad. No, it's not. So why don't we step away from the chair now? You try to bend your knees, stay upright, control your descent, do it again.
Yeah.
Right. And that's it. And talk about a little bit about one thing that would probably be interesting is that blending of where the weight room crosses over into athletics or everyday life, in terms of your quality of life, experiencing pain, injuring yourself. And if you look at injury, and I'll be specific here, musculoskeletal, orthopedic injuries, nearly all of those type of injuries come down to a lack of tolerance to either exhibiting a certain amount of force or accepting it. So take your basketball player who tears their ACL. The structures of the tissues of their knee were not able to accept the load that was being asked upon it. The same thing with your pitcher that tears a labrum. The same thing with your person who bends over to pick up a box of Christmas decorations and hurts their back. It's all a little bit of that force equation. So what's the best way to become more tolerant for your body to accepting force? Lifting weights or anything that's against resistance, right? So there's been a lot of debate over the past couple of years that I find entertaining about how much range of motion should you train through, how much.
That's something I wanted to get into this with you, actually.
Okay, shoot.
Yeah. So something that I've gotten a lot, I'm sure, I know for a fact Shimmy has gotten a lot, and I'm sure Dylan has, is people saying, why do you use so much range of motion? What's good about using that much range of motion? Is it safe to use that much range of motion?
Mm-hmm.
Is getting in these extreme positions, is that okay? Isn't that bad? That looks bad. And I just want you, as we're all fucking meatheads. You're the doctor here. I want to let you talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, and it's interesting to have seen that narrative evolve over the last 5 or so years, and it's just going to get more prevalent when social media hits a big, right? But I remember conversations like that going back to 2004 or 5. I was Googling on my dial-up internet speed how to increase your vertical jump, and I run across a book that's like, hey, you should be doing deep squats with load to increase your leg strength and then apply it to sport, right? Made total sense. And in that same thread, there's people saying, no, you can't bend your knees that much. Your knee will explode. There'll be bone everywhere. And that narrative has existed for a long time. And part of it, I wonder if it just comes from now being so prevalent from people wanting to make a name for themselves, right? You have, I won't mention any names, but certain concepts going around that if you bend a joint past 89 degrees, we'll say, then you're not, then you're not training optimal. So, from a scientific research perspective, there is a mound of evidence, good peer-reviewed quality research that has high validity, that shows the way to improve general tissue health is through loading a joint or a muscle through its furthest range of motion possible. So what that comes down to is everything from bone density to muscle belly density to tendon thickness to ligament thickness. All of that responds, as you guys put it, with a stretch under load. So from the injury pain perspective, take the example of someone who struggles to move their arm back here or to overhead press down here. If you're able to load that tissue and take it through a full range of motion, what's really going to hurt you in your case, for example, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, if you can lift X amount of weight with deep presses, overhead, vertical, deep pulls through a full range of motion, and as you're rolling, someone grabs your arm and twists it, you're so much less likely to get injured there just because your joint is accustomed to the force in those extreme ranges of motion. So there's no drawback to training hard through the full ranges of motion that you guys talk about all the time. Now, in context, if somebody tries that at first and they have issues with it, pain, instability, difficulty performing it, that's an excellent foot in the doorway to talk about the graded exposure to it. Because from a performance perspective, or how that translates to athletics or prehab, rehab, if you can take somebody who, let's say, can do a full deep ass to grass squat with 400 some pounds versus somebody who can do a half range of motion squat with 600 some pounds, who's going to be stronger in those positions that might be required of them on the field of play or the court? The person who can squat that through a fuller range of motion. Yeah. So the training with full range of motion, there's no scientific evidence to even suggest that it's inherently harmful. There's no research that I'm aware of that even suggests that it's the suboptimal way to prevent injury or to prevent pain or to increase your performance. It's just not there. And a lot of it, I think, comes down to it's way less entertaining or sexy to say you need to work hard and take your joints through their full range of motion. That's just it, full stop. Versus I have this one secret that if you stop at this specific angle, you're training optimally, or do this so you won't end up in Snap City. And training through a full range of motion is your best way to, I hate this term, but bulletproof yourself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I hate that term too, but
I can't stand it. But
point across, but so yeah.
Putting butter in my coffee.
So next time Shimmy or I post a video of some like crazy range of motion, don't tell us we're gonna blow our shoulders up, please.
Nope.
just tag Alex.
Well, I think what everybody has to remember is what Alex already noted is it's the C word and it's not cunt, it's context.
Yes.
Right. Like what you have to remember is when you see Trevor doing something or me doing something, what you have to remember is that we didn't do this always and it took us time to get there. Instagram doesn't really lend itself to that sort of thing, but I'm sure when Alex is working with somebody, and I know that when Trevor and myself and when DG is working with somebody, they can only go to the range of motion that they can control. And just because I can do something a certain way doesn't mean that you can.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean that you can't. It just means that it may take you more time. So just looking at somebody's movement pattern and mimicking it is fine, so long as you're capable of doing it. And it doesn't mean that just because you're not capable of doing it, that what I'm doing is more optimal, because it's about what's optimal for you at that point in time.
Mm-hmm. I'm sure you guys, when you first picked up a weight or got on a machine, you weren't doing full range of motion squats or presses or deficit push-ups, right? There was a limitation to that. Mm-hmm. Heck, when I first started squatting, I had a broomstick in my mom's bedroom trying to sit down as deep as I could, and I fell backwards, right? It takes years and constant practice.
Hold on a second. It's funny that you say that, because if you actually think about that, people that have never lifted weights before that are young, because you just said us, so you already know that we started lifting young, and a lot of people do. Most people that have never lifted weights before can lift through huge ranges of motion because they have nothing hindering them, right?
Yep.
So if they started that way, then they could just do it forever. It's usually those people that like they start out bad
and they build on those habits for anywhere for 2 to 10 years that they have to sort of unlearn and relearn. But beginners, no, beginners can pretty much hit huge depths from Jump Street because they have the mobility to do it, especially if they were athletes already.
Yeah. And that's another little bit of a topic that's interesting. If your general hypertrophy trainee went to a therapy clinic having difficulty with something, you're probably going to see a bit of a premium placed on what they would call mobility, right? But in the context of PT, a lot of us get that wrong and think and confuse mobility with flexibility.
Yeah.
So
you get that confused all the time. They don't understand the difference, and there is a difference.
Yeah, there's a huge difference. If you're having, I don't know, hamstring pain with stiff-legged deadlifts, and I have you sit in a chair and bend over and touch your toe, yeah, you're probably increasing the flexibility of your hamstring, but the mobility part is being able to move through that range of motion and exhibit strength in it. So from that context, and this might take us down another different avenue, if it's important that if you're seeing someone for your issues, to be very clear about asking them questions. What is this intervention helping me with? How does this apply to my situation? How does this apply to my goal? So you're not wasting time.
Yeah. That actually brings kind of is a good segue into another question I had for you. And the crux of this question is, what can people do? Like, what can they go and ask a therapist when they start, if they're going to be a good therapist? And the reason I asked this question is actually I recently had a client of mine who has been going to physical therapy, and he texted me one day and he was like, hey, this is what my physical therapist told me, and I just kind of want to talk to you. She said I should I should never do any lunges or squatting motions where my knee goes past my toes, and I should never go below 90 degrees because it's just awful for my knees, and it's never going to be safe, and I should never do it, and I should never come this far back on any kind of like a chest press. If I'm going to bench, I should only 90 degrees. And I just feel like it's wrong, but he wanted my thoughts on it. So what are some things that I'm not going to get into how I handle that situation? That's a whole other can of worms.
I'd be curious to hear it though.
Yeah. Okay. Basically, I said not to say that the physical therapist is wrong, but they're wrong.
Yeah. For sure, that was a good response.
But what are some things that people can ask, especially if they are training with weights, if they are doing sport activities, that they don't want to get a physical therapist that basically tells them like become like
give up what you're doing.
Give up what you're doing because it's terrible for you.
Yeah, there are definitely a lot of absolute statements made in my profession that, from one reason or another, have persisted over time, and it doesn't help a lot of the active population coming in, or even the general population. Some things to look for are it pays to do a little bit of research before you go into a clinic, right? And there are kind of three different categories I'll put places in America. Your general outpatient clinic that accepts insurance. So these will be your people to where you go into a clinic, you have a referral from a doctor, they take it. You'll typically be sharing time slots with other patients. So when I was in the outpatient world, I would sometimes see 2 or 3 people at once. You're relying on PT tech help or the unskilled support staff, and their job would be me to tell them, hey, go supervise this person doing this exercise, right? And these are typically your untrained undergrad students or people just looking for a day job that don't really have any knowledge in the field. So you can imagine what type of quality of care that gets. And it's oftentimes busy work, right? So like in the case of your person squatting, they might have them laying on a table, lifting their leg up, doing sideline leg raises. So that's your first type of clinic. Your second type of clinic would be your independent practitioners, cash-based therapists, to where you don't have to go through a doctor to a referral, and they're usually very open about the services they can provide. So if you're someone who is serious about hypertrophy training, athletics, anything in that realm, try to steer toward that type of therapist just from the get-go, because you're probably getting someone with a little more experience in treating your specific issues. And the third type of clinic is the physician-owned type of clinic, to where if you see a doctor and say, I'm having this type of issue, and they'll say, oh, we have therapy in-house, let's go on and set you up. It's mostly going to be experienced like the first general outpatient. So doing a little research and searching out for people, and that's as simple as getting on Google and typing in cash-based therapy near me. Let's say you go into a clinic, you find somewhere you might like, you think this is hopeful. At the end of the day, it's your care that you're dealing with. It's your time, and the services are being provided to you. I would encourage everyone to go to that clinic and ask the questions of, how long are the treatment sessions? Do I get to work with my therapist one-on-one for the entire session? Is the therapist going to be experienced in the issues I'm having with? Can I talk to them? And there's no place in the world that's going to tell you no to those questions. So gathering that information and making sure someone has a cursory knowledge of what you're dealing with is definitely the first step. And you'll be able to tell off the bat if someone isn't able to have a discussion like we're having with the issues at hand. The third part to that is to ask very pointed questions on what your therapist's response is. So, for example, if we're talking about changing your workout routines, your technique, et cetera, and you ask me, what does that look like? Can you give me an example of that? They better have a good answer of what that would look like. Otherwise, you're probably spinning your wheels. If you go to a therapy clinic and someone is using terms that they can't clearly define for you, that would be another red flag for me. Let's say you go into a place and they say, oh, well, you have trigger points as the reason you have pain. And you ask, can you tell me what that is? And they can't give you a clear definition. You're probably better off finding somewhere else. To your example, if you're asking these questions of a therapist and they use absolutist language, like you should never, this is awful, this is bad, you're going to injure yourself doing it this way, big red flag. And because that's all context dependent to someone's goal, like we've been talking about. And the most important one probably is to ask the therapist you're thinking about working with, what is the clear plan that you have in mind for me that we can work together with to progress toward my goal? After talking to someone, initial evaluation, you first meet someone, if you ask that question and they can give you an idea of, let's start here, reassess how this goes, and make adjustments to get to that end goal, you're probably dealing with someone who's going to be able to help you a little bit. And to add on to that, with follow-up sessions, if your therapist is constantly reassessing how your training sessions are going, are you having good pain responses? Are you progressing on the things that are important to you? And is willing to make adjustments from the plan, then it's probably going to turn out pretty well. But to make that boil down to a few points, ask questions about how someone can help you. Make sure they can clearly define the issue at hand and what you're dealing with. Make sure they can lay out a plan for you with all of the variables that you guys talk about accounted for. Make sure they're reassessing every time you see them. And make sure they have some sort of prior treatment experience.
That's super helpful, man. I really appreciate you kind of going into that. I think that's something that a lot of people will be able to take a lot of insight from, because a lot of times you go to a doctor and they just refer you out. I've been to an outpatient place, and in my experience, if you are someone who is active and are someone who is training, you're probably not going to have a good experience. You're not going to have the experience that actually gets you where you want to go.
Yeah. And one thing I forgot to mention there too is, in my world, we classify the different types of interventions or treatments we give people as either passive or active. Mm-hmm. Passive treatments would fall into the realm of joint manipulation, soft tissue massage, electrical stimulation, cupping, dry needling, things like that. And that has a time and a place in a plan of care for someone who is a serious athlete or hypertrophy trainee. But if that is the focus of most of the sessions that you go to, you're probably not going to see much benefit from that. And your therapist should be able to explain to you, these are some techniques we can use to help get your foot in the door to making progressions if your pain symptoms are too bad now, but we're using these as a gateway to progressing your activity tolerance, more so than you need to do these things to get better all the time, because there's no way around it. A good therapist is basically your guide that can give you a blueprint and the information you need to critically think the process through yourself and perform it yourself. And to do that, you have to do the work.
Yep.
Yep. There's a lot of it in my profession too, that do this one modality or this one specific manual technique that will fix your problems. And then you do it, you might feel better for a little bit. Your problem comes back the next day or even that day, and you're right back in the door asking for it again.
Yep.
So making sure that your sessions, if you're seeing someone, the majority of the time is being active and working towards your goal rather than being passive and having things done to you, rather than you being participatory in the process, is so important.
Yeah.
Alex, you got time for one more question?
Yeah, shoot.
Out here. Trevor, you had something that you wanted to say?
I was going to ask if either of you guys had any questions. If not, I have a funny.
You want to end with it?
Yeah. Well, what I think is funny. I mean, it might not be funny, but.
Okay. Well, so if you could briefly go through, this is something I've struggled with. I still struggle with it. I'm doing a movement and something feels off. First instinctual like thing that goes through my head is like, just keep going, see if it goes away, right? Probably, yeah, it's actually something I have to fight constantly. It's like, okay, wait, no, just put it down. Like, actually walking away from an exercise is a very difficult thing to do. Like, and working away from a workout, if you had something where like, say it was like, that was not a good pain, you know, it was very acute, it wasn't in the muscle, something like that. But maybe you could touch on that, but really I'm just I wanted to hit on, in what instance would someone go see you? Like, what type of injury, what are they looking for to go see a physical therapist versus something that like maybe will heal on its own? Like, what are we kind of looking for as far as that goes, and how do you navigate that process?
That's a really good question. There's that fine line between knowing what, as you put it, is acute or uncontrolled, as I often convey it, versus something that you're in control of is a little more chronic. So some red flags immediately are, you're doing a movement and you have an acute pain, oftentimes described as, you know, stabbing or burning or shaking, any instability. That's a good sign to just back off a little bit. But that seems common sense, right? So a lot of that comes down to, are your symptoms controlled with the movement, or are they being provoked more? So in your case, pick whichever exercise you want. Let's say you're doing a machine press or a bench press, and you start your warm-up sets and you have a little nagging pain that you think, yeah, you know, it's a warm-up set, it'll get better as I get into the first working set. You go through your warm-up process and you get to those working sets and you're performing them, but that pain you're having is slowly getting worse, or maybe even it's taking a worse jump within the set or between sets. That's probably a good idea. If you have tried adjusting your techniques, examining your training volumes and progressions, and the issue still won't get any better, it's probably a good idea to seek out a PT or a movement specialist, a specialist of some kind that can provide you with some insight of how to address that issue. Now, that's not to say if you have a pain with something and you haven't tried any of those own adjustments yourself, the alarm bell immediately rings and you run for help, right? Because a lot of the pains you experience day to day in the gym, if you adjust the principles that you guys talk about a lot, it'll most likely take care of itself. If it's lingering around, go see someone. And by lingering, I mean if it's a consistent progression through your mesocycle or training months, even when you're deloading or managing fatigue well, that's a good sign to probably seek out help. Or if in your training cycle, the pain you're experiencing gets worse during a session, and that happens consistently, let's say maybe over a period of a week, you train chest or shoulders twice a week, and you're having that pain, it gets worse during the session, it eases off a little bit, the next session it gets worse again, eases off at rest, gets worse, it's probably time to seek out some help. I hope that answers the question a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you, just out of curiosity, do you ever see people on the extreme ends where, this is just, again, kind of for my own curiosity, but like someone who maybe because I imagine that, with the evidence-based kind of like fatigue management, it sometimes breeds people who come on one extreme where everything is a potential injury, and then you have people who are just like, just completely destroyed. Pain is normal. I'm just going to push through it. Like, do you see these kinds of people in your practice?
All the time. Yeah. And it's commonly a little bit, it depends on the person. If they've been experiencing some pain or difficulty for a chronic case of months, it's usually on the former side of that, of everything is awful, everything hurts, I can't make any progress. Very rarely do I see the people who kind of like run through the wall and nothing stops them.
Yeah, they probably
but
band-aid it and never see anybody.
Yeah, and that might be a little confirmation bias too, right? Because people of that nature probably aren't seeking out healthcare help.
Right.
They're probably just thinking like,
their run is kind of a limp at this point, but they're still progressing forward somehow.
And I'll see a few of them, but they're like walking in the door, dragging their leg behind them, bruised and battered. But those conversations are a lot easier to have because it's really straightforward. Hey, you're pretty beat up. We need to cool you off a little bit.
Right.
But
bring it down a little bit.
Yeah, navigating the waters of getting people of the extreme who are very fear avoidant, very low tolerance to activity. That's a little bit more of a difficult process to navigate. But it really does go back to trying to find some way to give the person a small win. And for anybody listening who isn't seeing a PT or has questions about it, find the things that can give yourself the small wins. If you're having difficulty with the movement, scale the intensity back, scale the range of motion maybe a little bit until you can improve past it. Scale your volume back, take the small win in the short term, a little bit of delayed gratification so you don't make your issue worse and end up having to hear somebody like me talk at you for a little bit.
Yeah, I think that's a great thing to end on. One thing I wanted to ask before Trevor asked this question, you didn't mention BPC or TB 500 protocols at all. I'm very concerned.
Yes.
What is the protocol?
BPC.
Yeah. Blanket dosage recommendations, please.
Me?
I'm just messing with you.
I'm woefully ignorant to that side of things.
Oh, good. It's probably good if you just don't even touch it.
But to actually, interesting you bring it up because that does complicate matters a little bit, right?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. And that's when, for anybody enhanced out there listening and if you're having issues, it's okay to talk to your healthcare provider about it. We have HIPAA. There's no way anything you tell me I can go report. Right. So and that does come into playing into the factor that it might help you for somebody to coordinate with someone if you're getting your labs done, if you're having blood work done, for somebody who's more knowledgeable with that, if you're having issues or an injury or pain trying to rehab from it, to give their contact information to your PT and have them collaborate. And I would have no problem with calling someone and saying, hey, explain this to me like I'm woefully ignorant to any exercise. What do these extraneous factors have an effect on their rehab process? What can it look like in terms of me helping them progress? Because that's a factor. It is.
Right. Yeah. I imagine if you were, just for the sake of like a thought experiment, I mean, well, you were talking earlier about like people who make like very aggressive progressions. If you introduce something like PDs into that, it just becomes even more of a concern. And that's where you see guys where their strength goes up and surpasses the strength of their connective tissues, right? And they're making these large jumps in load. It's something that Trevor and I navigate with my training because I have the capacity a lot of the time to be adding maybe 10 pounds to a lift, 15, but we have to kind of keep that at bay because of the fact that if you're just increasing loads so rapidly that sometimes the body can't keep up. So that is an interesting thing to think about.
In a hypothetical world where I've seen enhanced people in the clinic before, that's one of the first things I'll just be straight up honest and say, hey, tell me, is there performance enhancing drugs in the mix here? If so, hey, let's talk about it.
Are you on steroids?
Yeah, I mean, I have no problem with that because if you're honest with me, then we can navigate that together through your rehab process. Especially, a few cases come to mind with major muscle tears.
Yeah.
Because that progression is going to look a little bit different compared to your average Joe that walks in off the street, right? I might spend a little bit more time with someone who is enhanced early on in the acute stages, doing a little more isometric exercises, or maybe placing a little bit more of a premium on doing some eccentric overloaded things rather than just taking that more aggressive progression early on and explain that to them. And you'll be thanking me for this later down the road when your tissue is a little more tolerant.
Yeah. That's good. I'm glad we touched on that. Trevor, you got a question?
Yeah. So
I also have a question.
Okay. Dylan's mad that you didn't give a BPC dosage recommendation. I'm mad because you didn't tell us how many lacrosse balls, foam rollers, and bands, how long we have to prehab for.
So, a good recommendation for that is if you're planning a pretty hard workout session, then it should at least be twice the length of what your planned session is. So foam rollers, get out the lacrosse balls. I mean, if you have to, put it right in the butt cheek and just sit on it, roll it all out.
Okay.
So my question was actually going to be around prehab.
Shoot.
Anyway. So that actually works.
The real question.
From what you from what you just said, I obviously I know your thoughts on it, but I was going to ask you what your thoughts were on prehab anyway, and if you think that it's a good idea. To me, and I've done it in the past, I can't wrap my head around it. And I think that makes absolutely no sense that, I've seen guys that can bench 500 pounds, but they're warming up doing like pull-aparts with like the lightest band ever, thinking that it matters, as an example. Or even something as simple as a bro bodybuilder doing internal and external rotations with a cable or a plate.
Or a dumbbell.
Yeah. Yeah, and they're, if I can demonstrate this, and they're standing doing this right here, and there's no actual force being applied to your rotator cuff.
Yes.
Yeah, that drives me crazy.
Is there a point, or is there a purpose in doing any of this stuff, or is there not?
That's a nuanced question. Now, to define, it sounds like how you're defining prehab is the use of stretching modalities as a warm up, essentially, right?
I'm defining it as the use of seemingly specific, but actually end up being non-specific movements that are barely loadable as a means of prepping the athlete or trainee for harder activity.
Good definition. So I'm very clear when I use the term prehab to anybody who lifts weights or exercises or is an athlete at all, that your prehab is done in your workouts by what we talked about earlier, training through your fullest range of motion that doesn't give you pain, listening to your technique cues, managing your fatigue, stimulus fatigue ratio. That's the true prehab. The benefit of some of the things you're referring to, like your foam rolling, like your band pull aparts, or your shoulder breaker exercises, or your band rotations and all, if it gives someone benefit, I'm very hesitant to tell them not to do it in a clinical setting. And scientifically, we know a lot of that is just a placebo effect. There's really nothing to it that, as you said, if you're strong enough to be lifting weights recreationally, doing things with a band is not going to provide you any benefit. So I'll turn to those things sometimes if the principles that we talked about here tonight are not giving someone a response, and see if it helps them, even from the perspective of them buying into it and thinking, oh, if I feel a little tightness in my pec or my hamstring or whatever, but I foam roll it and it feels a bit better going into my warm-up sets, have at it.
Gotcha.
But I would caution anybody listening that may see all of the prehab routines and all of the things that are said that you should do to really ask yourself, what application do they have in your program, and is it worth it? So from a scientific evidential perspective, picking your first exercise and progressively warming up to your working set is the way to go, 100%. But if it makes somebody feel better to grab a band and do some internal, external rotations, if you do it from the perspective of this makes me feel better, it might make my working sets a little bit better, but you understand this isn't the key to my fitness progression or wellness, I have no problem with it in the place of somebody of a program. So that's a little contextual too, because depending on the person you're working with, they can take that information and kind of take it to the extreme and spend your 30, 45 minutes doing that type of warm up when it is not really doing anything to help. And if that gets to be the case, then I'll say, all right, here's the science behind it. Here's your warm up might look like this. Pick one or two of those prehabby things that you like that makes you feel good, that maybe reduces your symptoms or maybe makes you have a better mind muscle connection, whatever it may be. And let's maybe do 10, 15 repetitions of each and then get into your warm up sets. So it's almost like if somebody comes to me and is a little bit, for lack of a better word, addicted to those things, weaning them off of it slowly as their understanding of proper warm-ups and progressions becomes a little bit more clear.
Makes a lot of sense. Yeah, and it kind of speaks to buy-in that you were talking about earlier, where if it's not particularly harmful and they find some benefit, you're probably not going to take it away from them. Maybe allow them to do some of it. If it starts to become a hindrance, then it would be like some time where you'd intervene, right?
Yep. And that goes back to the whole placebo and nocebo conversation. If somebody finds benefit and they think it helps them, as long as it's not doing them harm or slowing their progress or impeding their progress, I'm not going to step in and say, this is wrong, you shouldn't do this. Because then I become the person that we just talked about you should avoid using extremist language, because it's way more nuanced than that.
Yeah.
Right on.
And when you think about injury as not just a physiological thing, it may have, psychological, it does have psychological components. That becomes a little bit more.
And the last thing on it, but to apply that, if you do some band rotations or maybe some sort of quad stretching or foam rolling or whatever, and that makes your symptoms better during the workout, you should 100% do it. And then very gradually try to experiment how you're feeling after your symptoms have calmed down, doing whatever it may be that makes you feel better. And you'll often find that you don't need or feel necessary to do those things that you did to make yourself feel better in the first place.
I imagine I'll probably stop after this because I could probably talk about this for a long time, but I imagine a lot of the time when people feel the need, like maybe they have to do some sort of activation, need to activate my glutes before I do this. It's probably something that needs to be addressed in like training technique or one of those components that you talked about earlier. It's not the activation that is going to make or break their workout, right?
Nope, definitely not. And it definitely is like, that's an increasing frequency of people saying, oh, I need to activate my glutes before I squat or do lunges or activate my rotator cuff before I do things. And, first time I hear something like that, I just let it go and then talk about, okay, let's talk about your technique. And then usually people will fill it in the right places if you can figure out their technique. But if they keep going to those things, then I'll start to have the conversation of, well, when you're doing a squat, your glutes are actually active the whole time. Heck, when you're walking, your glutes are active the whole time. Otherwise, you'd be falling on your face.
Yeah.
And then they'll say, what do you mean by that?
How much do you love the glute amnesia? How do I wake up my glutes?
Wake them up.
If I had to rank my top 3 least favorite nocebic fitness things or wellness things, it's the glute activation, the don't let your knees go over your toes, and you have to maintain a neutral posture, pelvic tilt. Those are my ones I could. Pelvic tilt. I spend a lot of time pushing back against those.
I'm wearing posture straps right now. I can be in this position all day. All right, we'll let you get out of here, Alex. This is a really, really insightful conversation. I learned a lot, and I think the listeners will learn a lot as well.
Great. Thank you.
Thanks for having me on, guys.
Thank you so much. Is there anything you want to plug or just give a shout out to?
I mean, if anybody's interested, I'm planning on opening my own online physical therapy clinic. I've started it's going to be called Just Lift Performance Therapy. Started trying to get the marketing out a little bit, making some Instagram content, trying to navigate that whole process. It's pretty foreign to me, but that's the end goal.
It's fun.
So
that's awesome, dude.
Will you be able to work outside of your state? How's that work?
Yeah, actually now there's a physical therapy compact that if you get licensed in one state, it actually applies to all of them if you pay for it.
Mm-hmm. Very cool.
Let's talk. We'd love to send some clients your way.
Yeah, for sure. And there's legislation now. We have direct access where you can come see a therapist without a doctor's referral, but it looks like some legislation is going to pass where that direct access is unlimited. So there's no specific constraints to time or sessions. So
more accessibility.
Yep.
Sweet.
It'll be pretty nice.
Awesome, Alex. Well, I'll make sure to link all your stuff down below, and we'll definitely shout you out a lot because I find that this is super helpful. One thing I want to end on, I'm very curious as to how I can personally get better about this stuff. Obviously, I'm not a PT. I'm not going to become one, but I would like to know more about it. Do you have a book or some sort of resource? I know you mentioned barbell medicine that the layman could refer to, maybe become a more informed consumer. Just maybe as a coach, I can just be more informed on these things and what to look out for.
Yeah, some of the best resources, barbell medicine does a really good job of compiling a lot of research on pain and injury in context to athletes. There are some other resources, clinicalathlete.com. That's another PT named Dr. Quinn Hinnock. He's really good.
Oh yeah.
Yep, I'm sure you guys have heard of him. He's great. You can also start to learn deciphering some research articles for yourself. I know Greg Nuckols does a really good job of compiling a lot of research that can be applied in the rehab prehab world. And it's stuff that I read all the time, and it's applicable to clinical practice and how you exercise to avoid pain and injury and performance. It's a lot of good stuff. Those are the primary ones I turn to. I don't think I'd recommend going on the ncbi.com and looking up raw research articles.
Sweet. Yeah, no, I even noticed that you listen. I mean, you're a consumer, a lot of the hypertrophy stuff. And I think that, especially with your mind and how you understand this stuff, you can take some of those principles and apply them over to your practice, which is, I imagine, what you do to some extent.
Yeah, I sometimes I joke and tell people I might use 2% of what I learned through PT grad school, getting a doctorate of all things, but 98% of the stuff I do is training information, essentially.
Yeah, I listen to one of your training things. You're listening to like the round table of like Cass and Dr. Mike. You could hear in the background while you're training. I was like, oh, that's cool.
Those are really entertaining too. I love those too.
Yeah.
I've actually listened to them a couple times just to tease out like some of the biomechanics discussions and how things go.
I'm sure it's very interesting for you.
Yeah.
Sweet. Well, I would love to have you back on at some point, so maybe we can chat.
Anytime you guys want, feel free, hit me up. I think I've badgered all of you on Instagram at one point in time or another. So
yeah, that's good. We have the back and forth, man. All right. Well, I'll let you get out of here. Thank you so much for coming on, man.
Thanks, guys.
Have a good one, man.